is in the house tonight. Everybody just have a good time.
To open, do you want to speak broadly about what inspired you to run for board?
So broadly, as a social work student, I care about services and welfare for students. The USU is the most prominent service provider, I would say, on campus, and I think the USU has embodied a business model, and I'm going to challenge that.
So, I'd like to follow up on a few of those things, but we'll just get through the preliminary stuff first. Are you aligned with a political party, and independent of that, how would you describe your political views?
So I'm a member of a political party, the Labour Party, and I am on I'm in a political faction on campus, National Labour Students, which is Labour Left, and my values align with that. I'm left wing.
Yeah. So at this point, how would you distinguish yourself from all the other micro-factional Labour candidates running in this election?
So like Shannon, George, Atia. Well, George and Atia are Labour right, so I would differentiate from them on just a few things, but that's more like policy outside of university, and like philosophies like unionism and feminism and socialism. And in terms of like Shannon Potter, I don't think she was even a member of Labour Left, but I would say that we have the same values, but she probably wasn't just a Labour Left member, but that might have changed of recent.
Have you considered your preferencing at all?
No, I've been too busy on the ground, really. But I'm sure there's going to be talks later on, I'd imagine.
Hypothetically, if pressed by Honi to give a first, second, and last, who would you place respectively at the moment?
In terms of like who would I preference? I have no idea. I guess that also has to do with like which campaigns are strong.
Sure.
And you don't really realize that until like next week and later on. But I definitely want to preference really progressive candidates. So that would cancel out a few, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
Sure.
This is like a wishful thinking positive question, but presuming, or if you were to be elected, who would you be voting for the president of the USU?
That's not even on my mind. And also that would have to go through, as you know, with NLS, through Caucus.
Okay, so I'm glad you answered that way,
Yeah.
because it's not a hard segue to the question I'm sure you've been prepared for.
Yes.
How do you think your role on the board would be helped or hindered by the fact that you are bound by Caucus, and how do you negotiate the fact that a lot of the confidential parts of your fiduciary duty do, in many cases, conflict with the fact that you do need to consult Caucus?
Yeah. So when I'm talking to students, I'm telling them quite honestly where I align politically. I am left wing. And when I'm talking to them about my policies, my ideas reflect very much my caucus. So when they are voting for me, they are voting for me and also my caucus because our values align. In terms of like my role on union board and how I'm also accountable to caucus, what happens on union board I will bring back to caucus. We will debate, and when you come out of debate, you come out usually, I would say, with a better outcome. And that will go to USU. It's pretty simple, really.
What about things like CEO remuneration or things that have been discussed in camera? Would you be comfortable in taking things which are disclosed under the assumption of confidentiality to what is essentially another caucus room and discussing them openly, or are you forced to become like a...
Well, obviously, in terms of like confidentiality, I don't know much what happened in Canberra.
Sorry, in camera, as in...
Oh, in camera.
Yeah,
I thought you were talking about something that happened in Canberra, and I'm like, what's that? In camera, well, that would be a whole lot of legalities, and I would be discussing that with my caucus, saying like, okay, I can't discuss this. What is legal is legal. What is illegal is illegal. But in terms of everything else, I would be discussing with my caucus.
A lot of students last year said that they wouldn't seek the votes of Senate-appointed directors if they were to run for executive positions on the board.
They wouldn't seek the vote?
They wouldn't, and they've done so.
Okay.
Could you conclusively say whether or not you would seek the votes of Senate-appointed directors in the pursuit of an executive position?
Sorry. In terms of like, the executive, that's still not even on my mind. I am really focusing on the campaign. NLS has always had a smaller campaign than other campaigns, so really we drive that first before anything else. That's why we get elected, because we focus on the campaign ahead. In terms of like Senate electors, people in Senate, I think it is good to work collaboratively with everyone on the executive and outside of that. So I can see why people have done it in the past, but that's not even on my mind right now, to be honest.
Sure. Not in that case, in any case,
Yeah.
under what circumstances would you consider it appropriate to breach your duty to the board for the greater good?
In terms of like, are we referring to certain things of the past? Like
It doesn't have to be explicitly tied to Rowie, but it certainly is implicitly.
Yeah. I think it's really important to keep the USU accountable and transparent. People throw the word around a lot, transparent, but it does have a lot of meaning. I spoke about it in the Surge interview yesterday, and it is really important to make clear that power isn't top-down, it's horizontal, and that we on board have power as well. And in terms of like Tom Rowie and the leaking of documents, I think that was in the realm of what he should have done. I would have voted to keep him on, and I would have done the same thing. So yeah, I think you can do things like that at times.
Sure.
In terms of the policies you put forth, what do you think is your number one priority as a junior board director for your first 12 months, your first big policy?
I would say probably the USU mentor program, because that's something that's just very achievable, I would say, and something that the USU, I would believe, would be very interested in, because I've been involved in clubs and societies, and if you look around, and unions in general, membership is dropping, so like unions around the world, their memberships are dropping. And I don't know if that's something about the membership and people don't see their worth to get involved in the union. So if we have a USU mentor program, it would be about making the union relatable to others, and making them want to sign up and get involved. So if you had a mentor program, you would have certain people from certain backgrounds getting into the program. When they sign up for an access card on the computer, you would have people who already are involved in the USU being the mentors, and they would be able to align them with like what clubs and societies from their faculties, try and figure out what skills and development they want in terms of like societies as well. And I think that's very achievable. Like it's quite easy to do in terms of like the system, and arts program works very well too.
We took questions from anyone via a Google Doc, and one that's coming for you is that someone who spoke to you about this USU mentor program was wondering how you would be able to how it would suit demand, right, for the number of people signing up for access versus like the number of available mentors, like whether you had an outline for how you actually expect it to work, like would a mentor have X number of people?
Okay. Someone asked me that before, and I said like the arts program, there's a few thousand new art students every year, and out of those art students, there's something like 200 art students wanting to have a mentor in that program. So like if you look at the 16,500 people who sign up for an access card every year, and you translate that into how many people might want to be a part of the mentor program, it would probably be around 500, 400 by percentage and related. So it would probably be something around probably 20, maybe to like 30 mentees to every mentor if you say you had like, I don't know, 10, 20 mentors. So like it depends how many like mentors you get in the first place. But if you had 10 mentees for the mentor, it'd be quite sustainable, I would say. But it depends like how much interest you get and how many people want to get involved. But it is about self efficiency and sustaining, and also if it's paid or if it's not paid, whether it's volunteer based, and if there is some skill development in it as well.
Yeah. At the point where it's 20 or 30 mentees to a single mentor, what do you think is the benefit for students there?
Yeah, well, it's also like networking between students as well, and also getting some students involved with other students and how they might even get involved in clubs and societies. I think it's a very powerful thing when you have common interests with people and you find like connections, and that would be very beneficial for clubs and societies, I think. I think it would be more about people meeting together and figuring out where they would fit in clubs and societies more than the mentoring.
Yeah.
What is the most important USU program as your mind, and why?
USU program. Would you say the V team be one? Yeah, I would say the V team. I think that's a really good program. I'm very welfare based, so like when I look at Incubate and Kickstart, they're good, and they're important in terms of like developing programs and making certain students who have a passion in that area get involved. But the V team is something I'm really interested in because it could really reach a broad like kind of community area. So like it's the people at Sydney University getting involved more widespread. And I think that's something that the USU is lacking. They've looked more on the micro recently, not so much the macro. And I would really like to see more of the V team getting even like some sort of like club and society access, like even a club and society for the V team itself. But yeah, the V team is something I really like.
Cool. And just as a follow up to that, which institution do you think does more for the welfare of students, the SRC or the USU?
Definitely the SRC, I believe. In terms of like welfare and activism is something very important, something that I like to consider myself to be a part of. In terms of service providing, I would say the USU is very instrumental in that. But I would like to see the USU kind of embody a bit of activism in itself, like making services more accessible, and trying, like, for example, the breastfeeding policy that made access to certain women on campus much more better. So, like, I think you can definitely bring activism into services, and that's something I really want to drive.
Cool. That deals with something that we would have asked later very nicely. What do you think have been the greatest policy achievements or failures of the current board?
Well, they've done some transparency measures with like posting minutes on the website, and also the censure of cab charges. I think that's really important. I think that's very good, although that did come out of something bad. But I think that's something very good. And the breastfeeding policy, like I said before.
Yeah. So, I mean, just one program we were going to hit pretty hard in this is that the USU have introduced a number of equity programs with respect to access cards. What do you think is the sustained benefit of having an access card if you're a low SES student?
So what is the benefit of having it if you're a low SES? Well, getting involved in on campus in general is very beneficial for students, like getting involved in clubs and societies to develop skills. Like I couldn't really string a sentence before, but when I got involved in Amnesty International, I was very shy, but I got involved in like public speaking and networking with Amnesty International on a broader field. And I think it's very beneficial that way, but also services on campus, like coffee's cheaper, food services are cheaper. But as the interview on Surge said yesterday, like, a sandwich might cost $8, but with access might cost like $7 or $6.90. So it's not that much, but it does make a difference in the end. So I am looking at making access that much more equitable. So like more discounts or more coffees when you have like more points, free access for low SES. Like Liam Carrigan, who I helped with his campaign last year, he came from a background which was like he had some sort of disadvantage with access to services, and access made him much more able to get involved on campus, meet friends, develop skills, get involved in clubs and societies. And that's the narrative that I really felt was very strong, and some students really, identify with that.
Carrigan ran a very successful campaign, and it's not the sort of thing you can do without a degree of leisure time. And to that end, I think it's true that most university institutions are tied to an extent, to privilege. Do you think that removing access as an obstacle is enough to get people who are not time rich?
So in terms of like getting rid of access for students who have a lot of commitment, or for the
Well,
degree,
it's
or
to say, like the example of like students who may work to support themselves
Okay.
or not, or might not have the advantage of having like the amount of like time that other students have, because like a lot of CNS is basically you involve yourself usually for no money or anything like that. It's all like free time stuff. Whereas some students don't have that luxury.
yeah.
So
I would definitely say, like, in terms of like free access for those students, I would say yeah, definitely. I think in Liam Carrigan's case, he didn't have a job, and that would be beneficial for him because he didn't have, like, for example, a large bank account for himself. So yeah, definitely, I would say yeah, free access for low SES. And I work casual and part time, and I can see, like, I come from okay background, we're comfortable. And I can see it would be difficult for low SES students who have to work, who have to go to university, and would benefit from that as well.
this is just two more questions about sort of the activist or ethical space that the board inhabits. Firstly, do you think it's appropriate to discuss issues like CEO remuneration in camera?
In terms of like camera, I know there's been a few problems with that in general, like people not liking it. I don't have a massive opinion on it, because I'm not even elected onto board yet, so I haven't really seriously considered it. So, I would say cameras are important in terms of like when it's issues of legality and like all that stuff. But yeah, I would say so. In terms of like board meetings, I don't think you should film them.
No, sorry. In camera is like a mechanism the board adopts to go under complete discretion. So like, for example,
It's
the
the
US
opposite of what it intuitively means.
Oh, okay.
So
right.
at like a USU meeting, general meeting.
Yeah.
Any member can come and observe, but if the board votes to go in camera, all observers will have to leave. Tweeting stops, minutes stop, all that stuff. So, for example, when they were negotiating the CEO's most recent contract, that was a negotiation that took place entirely in camera. So, we don't know.
Oh, okay.
What the
No,
money
I think
is.
that should be open to public.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Cool. And then the second question is a two-part. The first one is, do you support the full divulgence of financials and expenses adopted by board directors on stuff like cab charges, on stuff like meal vouchers?
Mm.
And then the second one is, do you think the board's response to board directors Magyar and Carrigan's cab expenditure scandal earlier this year was appropriate, or was it too harsh, too soft?
Well, like, I think the censure was appropriate. Like, I don't know if they agreed to censure Robin Magyar or not, but they were looking at him. And I think it is appropriate to overlook students' funds in general. And in terms of the other, what was the first one? Sorry?
So the first one was, do you support like an itemised list outlining like all board director financial spending in each month, like just making that completely?
Yeah, I think that
transparent?
should be open to the public record. In terms of like staff, I think that's a different issue. But in terms of like elected officials, I think that's completely reasonable.
So now we're just moving on to like the finance portion of the day. This is either everyone's most trained or least trained section. But
That's probably, yeah.
so if you had to cut $1 million from the USU budget, what would you be looking at cutting?
I'm not really sure what the finances are, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
If I was elected, I would overlook it and see what there was, but I wouldn't be looking to cut anything. If anything, I'd be looking to have what's there, and if anything, increase the opportunities, and make them better in that way. But no, I don't believe that I would do that.
And then this is a question that we've sort of melded with one that we received from readers. But what do you think the board's role is? What do you think the board's role is politically in terms of approving clubs and societies? So, for example, earlier this year we saw BroSoc happen.
Yeah.
What do you think about like the board's role in like approving or disapproving a society based on like an ideological position?
Well, every club and society does have to go through the board, and I think a club and society that could do more harm than good should be overlooked by the board, whether that's a political lens. In terms of BroSoc, I know that they were looking at mental health as a massive thing, and that's an important issue. But the naming of the society, I personally believe, was interesting, an interesting choice. And that was something that they should seriously consider, and also the connotations with it, and ideas of masculinity. And I think the USU is a political institution, innately, and the decisions will be as such.
Yeah, and then just the second part from the readers, which is, would you support allowing BroSoc into the clubs and societies if it were to reform the problematic problematic aspects of its original iteration?
Well, that's something that would have to be seriously looked at. In terms of the name, it would have to change it. In terms of like the membership, that would have to be overlooked, and the mission, so like mental health, advocacy and activism, that is something really important. I'm not willing to isolate anyone, and I'm wanting everyone to be involved, and that's something I would strive for.
Cool.
Do you have any questions for us?
Do they usually do that?
I don't know, you're entitled to
We've
them.
started that now.
Oh, no, not really.
I've got
Pretty safe
one or
bet
two
that
more.
comes prepared with them. That's something you don't get briefed on.
I was gonna just ask generally, knowing that the union board is like mostly an administrative role, what do you think is like, what experience do you bring to the position that's going to make you best suited for it?
Well, like, I'm a social work student, and yeah, I throw that around a lot because I think it is different. So I do bring a fresh lens, I would like to say. In terms of like experience, I was an office bearer as a secretary on Amnesty International, as a treasurer in Epicurean. So I bring an intersection of food services and welfare and human rights, and I think that's a nice combination for the USU as a service provider. But more than that, I'm in the SRC Council, so I've done some work with policy and negotiations and working as a team in general. And also out of university, I've been involved in NGOs, volunteer programs, and I think that's a lot of character building. And I work at Country Road, and you need to have a good work ethic on board as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just to one of your specific policies, you've talked about an independent grocery store on campus. How do you think a service like that would interact with the existence of something like the food co-op, which is already provided?
Yeah, well, like in terms of like an independent grocery store, they've done that at UNSW, and it has been successful, and it's made it much more accessible to students. In terms of where they can actually be done, Wentworth, they have a lot of private leasing, and in that, the independent grocery store wouldn't be too much of a stretch. And in terms of like sustainability, I think the USU would play a part in that. And that would be whether that's through clubs and societies, or volunteer programs, or jobs, through students, or casual part-time staff. I think it can be done. I think, you just need to negotiate. And I think it's a good policy, and I think everyone should run on it and continue that tradition, because you're more likely to get it if you keep on running on it.
Cool.
Just to clarify, it says here that you apparently were Sub-Ski Society in 2013. Is that just membership?
Just membership. I don't know why it hasn't got member next to it.
Yeah,
I am
curious.
Sub-Ski Society.
I pity anyone who is.
Well, no, I wanted to go skiing, and I wanted to maybe go to New Zealand for a ski trip, because I love hiking and stuff. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna go there. Fair enough. But I don't judge anyone. But
No.
How to,
No, that's
I was
us.
just wondering.
That's just what we're doing.
Also, how much does it cost to maintain a 1961 Morris Minor per annum?
Well, my dad is a parts mechanic, and the thing is, it's not really driving. It's more in the works of building. So me and my dad, we have a work project with each other, and we're doing it together. It's a bonding thing.
That's cool.